game for Roy Halladay.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Faithful Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Davis, joined today by my guys, Snap, Gint, and George. And on today's show, we have a special guest, Rob Maaddi. Here he is. Rob, thank you so much for joining us, and how are you?
What's up, guys? I can't really hear you too well. How are you?
I'm good. Does it sound a little better now or no?
I can't hear.
Okay, hold on. Let me try to figure this out.
Tough way to start.
Yeah, let me try to figure this out. George, why don't you tell us?
Ask him if he's connected to Bluetooth on his car, maybe.
It's better.
It's better now? Awesome. There we go. Perfect. I was going to have George talk about the Phillies move yesterday to kill some time. But all right, man, let's talk some Eagles for a second. So, this fan base has become very divided very quickly this season over, who should be the quarterback of the future going forward in 2021. Can you just talk a little bit about where you stand? You're very active on Twitter about this team. So just a little bit about your stance on the quarterback situation.
Well, it's a very difficult dilemma, guys, for the organization. I think right now they don't know who's going to be their quarterback of the future, but based on the contract that they gave Carson Wentz, unless they can find a way to move on from that and still absorb a significant cap hit, a historic cap hit, he's got to be the guy. You got to give Carson Wentz an opportunity to be the quarterback that you paid him to be, and we've seen a body of work over the first 4 years of his. I'm not going back to 2017. I'm just going back to last December. In last December, he basically put a practice squad group of guys on his back and carried them to the postseason. For a lot of reasons, things fell apart for him this year. For a lot of reasons, they're not solely his fault. He certainly takes a lot of the blame, but I think you got to look at the talent around him. You got to look at the offensive system. And based on that, the best thing I think for the organization moving forward is to try and find a way to fix Carson Wentz. That's a whole lot easier said than done.
Yeah, we all pretty much agree with that. But let me ask you this. If you put the money aspect aside and just went based off of, I don't want to say this year, just based off the two guys, which one would you start week 1 next year?
I haven't seen enough out of Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts it's been a mixed bag of success for him. He's looked good, and he's also struggled. He's looked good in the first half, and he's had some tough moments in the second half. But again, it's not all his fault either, because he's playing with the same offensive line that couldn't block for Carson Wentz. They can't protect Jalen Hurts. He's playing with the same receivers who struggle to get open for Carson Wentz. The same thing for Jalen Hurts. Now, he's shown you he could do more with his legs for sure, but at the same time, he's young, he's growing, he's learning. And then you just look at this Dallas game. They had 2 opportunities inside the red zone when it was still a close football game. He threw an interception and he fumbled. Questionable fumble. Now, again, it's, the turnovers are going to happen when you're pressing, when you're trying to make things happen, when guys around you can't get the job done. So based on what I've seen out of Jalen Hurts, I think he's impressive. He's got potential, but he's got a long way to go.
Yeah, Rob, after a 4-10-1 season, obviously we need some change. We could use change everywhere, it seems. What changes do you expect, if any, for next season?
Man, I don't anticipate the big change that everybody wants to see. And that big change, of course, would be the general manager. I know there's a lot of people who don't want to see Doug Peterson back, but let's start with Howie Roseman. I put this stat out there the other day, guys, and it took maybe a half of the Monday Night Football game for me to do this research. And I was just looking at every player who was drafted since 2014 or was signed as an undrafted free agent since 2014. And then there's 274 of those guys who've made the Pro Bowl, and only one of them was drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent by the Eagles, and that was Carson Wentz. Now, that talent or lack thereof in the draft, it's not hard to make a Pro Bowl, guys. It's not. Tyrod Taylor made a Pro Bowl in 2015. There's so many guys like before this year, because this year it's just one roster, but there were injury replacements. The guys who go to Super Bowl don't play. So like that shouldn't be the be all end all is Pro Bowl. I always tell everybody it should be all pro, which the AP, we put that out first week of January. If you make the all pro roster, now you're the best bet. You make a Pro Bowl roster. Like I said, Tyrod Taylor made one. Yet the Eagles have only had one guy that they drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent since 2014 to make that. That speaks volumes, and that explains why this team is a mess right now, and that's why they're about to be 4-11-1 or maybe 5-10-1, and it doesn't really matter other than for draft picks. That said, I don't think Howie's going anywhere. We've heard enough reports that say how comfortable Jeffrey Lurie is with Howie, and I think he is. And I think Howie's body of work, having won a Super Bowl 3 years ago, is going to buy him more time in Jeffrey Lurie's mind. I also don't think Doug Peterson's going anywhere. I spoke to him last week, and he told me he wants to be back. This week, he reiterated it in the media. He said he's confident. He sounds like a guy who's been told that he's going to be back. So I don't think he's going anywhere. The only thing I could foresee them doing, short of one of those two guys moving on, is trying to figure out an offensive coaching staff structure where there is an offensive coordinator, because there isn't one this year. And I didn't get a chance today to ask Doug this. I'll try on Friday, is how much of this offensive system and the structure, having so many voices, has that impacted the team? And I don't think that, Doug is a guy who's a great leader. And as a great leader, you're a good listener. So now he's listening to a lot of voices, right? He's trying to incorporate what Rich Scangarello talks about, what Marty Mortonweg talks about, what Press Taylor wants to do. So you got Andrew Bynum, you got all these guys, right? And there needs to be a defined structure. And I think maybe that will be the way they go. Short of that, this team's going to be in trouble going forward if they're still picking the same players the same way. Now, maybe John Dorsey's already getting paid. He's here as a consultant. Maybe Jeffrey Lurie says, hey, he's got to have more say, more authority into personnel matters. Will Howie be willing to give that up? I doubt it. Could Jeffrey Lurie force that on him? That could be a little bit of a hope for Eagles fans out there.
Before I get to my next question, I just want to go off of that for a second. You mentioned bringing in defined roles and bringing in a new OC. And you also mentioned Howie, does he want to give up that aspect of his general manager job? The way I've heard Doug talk about, play calling in his press conferences, do you think that's something that can happen? Like, do you think Doug would be willing and would be a willing listener to say, if Jeffrey Lurie comes to him, I'm bringing in an OC and you can still be my head coach, or you got to go? Is that something that you can see happening, or does Doug want that playbook?
Doug wants to be the play caller. He's talked a lot about that. He takes pride in doing it. And I think that's something that would have to be forced on him by Jeffrey Lurie. Like, hey, if you want to stick around, this is what's going to have to happen. That said, I think Doug takes too much heat for his play calling. We talk a lot of people after this game. Let's just take the Cowboys game, for example. And a lot of people were bent out of shape after the game, blowing Doug Peterson up for not running the ball enough. You weren't going to win the game and score 38 points running the football against Dallas. Miles Sanders was averaging 3.8 yards per carry. They had two times they went 3 and out in that game. And the 2 times they went 3 and out, they ran the ball 5 out of 6 plays. So when I hear people after that game say, oh, they should have run the ball, I go, you're not scoring 38 points. Now, there are other times, like when you're up 17-0 first week of the season against Washington, you run the ball. So that said, there's some opportunities where Doug's got to get better. He's got to be more committed to the run. But I think play calling, though, falls a lot of – there was no issues with his play calling in 17 when guys were executing. It comes down to execution. And when you don't have the talent to execute, your play calling isn't going to look as good. When you don't have DK Metcalf running out there and you got JJ Arcega-Whiteside running out there, or you don't have Justin Jefferson and you got Jalen Reagor, well, if the guys can't run the pattern the way it's supposed to be run, or make the play, or high point the ball the way they should, or run it as crisply, it's not going to happen no matter what it is. So, I think the issue is more talent, bringing in more NFL level quality talent, Pro Bowl caliber talent, and this team lacks it top to bottom.
So let me keep it with Doug for a second. You know, I'm not around this team, so maybe I'm reading too much into it just through a television and you know the interviews that I listen to. But it seems as though there is a disconnect between Doug and Carson, at least this season in 2020. So is it possible that the Eagles can come back with both Doug and Carson as the starter next year and have success together? Like, is that relationship salvageable on the field?
Is it possible they can come back? I'm sorry, it was breaking up a little bit. Is it possible they can come back with Doug and Carson next year?
Carson as a starter and have success together, yes.
I think they can because they have, right? They have. It's been a while since they had the success they had in 17, but then I'll point back to the success they had in December of 19. So I think there's a way that they can come back together and have success. But there's got to be a more a structured offensive coaching staff, and I think there needs to be more an identity for this offense. This offense lacks identity. Are you committed to the run? Are you committed to what do you want to do? How do you want to run? How do you want to be an offensive football team? So I think they have to really prioritize, and Carson and Doug have to sit down and figure out, hey, what works best for Carson? And we know we've all criticized Doug for not rolling him out and not getting him out of the pocket, and he's keeping him dropping back with the 3-step drops into a collapsing pocket and all that stuff. They got to really put it together and figure out what's going to be best for this offense. So can they do it? Yeah. Is it likely? I don't think it's as likely with the current scenario. Something has to be tweaked. Something's got to change along the way.
Let me keep it with the offense because you brought up earlier how the receivers just aren't getting open. How do you see this receiving core improve? Do you spend another first-round pick on one? With the cap situation, I'm not sure where they could go other than that. So how do you see them improving?
It's a great question. I think you got to really look at it in the draft. But then when you spent a second-round pick last year, and that's a bust, and a first-round pick this year, I don't want to call Jalen Reagor a bust. The kid missed 6 games. I think he's got potential. I think next year is going to be a big year for him. So I'm not ready to go there, but we know that Justin Jefferson's already a star. So you kind of missed a little bit there. Are you willing to invest another top 10 pick on a receiver, or do you go cornerback or something like that? Because they got a lot of needs. How do the wide receivers get better? I don't know what you can do from the outside the organization. You're not going to go spend a lot of money on receivers. They spend money on aging receivers from Alshon to Deshaun, and that's backfired on them. You can't do that. So you got to develop these guys. I don't think you could change the wide receiver coach again. How many have they had under Doug Peterson? So they keep constantly rotating. You just need guys, maybe an off season together, because this year, obviously, they didn't have it. Something like that, have the off season together, maybe make that work. And some of these guys, hopefully, they can have some success.
Yeah, going back, touching on what you just said about wide receiver, cornerback in the draft. If you were Howie Roseman or whoever's going to be in charge this offseason, who are you taking at 6? Because they're projected at 6 right now, and there's a couple. The biggest 2 options is cornerback and wide receiver, with the possible chance of the kid Parsons sliding to 6, which I don't know if he really will because he's so talented. But where are you going? Who would you pick out of the options there?
Man, I think you need another weapon at wide receiver, but you hope that Jalen Reagor can develop. I really believe they need a corner too. I gotta wait it out right now. And you know what I also would be willing and interested in doing, because this team's got so many needs. I'm not saying trade way out, but if you're at 5 or 6 and they're projected at 6 right now, and you could drop to maybe 9 or 10 and pick up extra picks, I'd be interested in doing that. And then maybe you just take whoever's best available, the corner or the wide receiver, at 8, 9, or 10. So I think the best thing that can happen this week is they move up as high as possible, so you can be in that scenario to where maybe you could trade down in the top 10, but not out of the top 10. But yeah, it's got to be receiver, cornerback. I lean a little bit towards corner and hope that Reagor can develop, because you don't have a young guy coming up at cornerback. You can't. There's no hope that somebody at corner is going to be that cornerback opposite Darius Slay. That, at wide receiver, at least there's some hope that Jalen Reagor can be a guy.
Yeah, so obviously the cap situation is not good right now. Are there any big names on the roster, possibly with bigger cap hits, that you could see being cut or traded this offseason?
I think there's a lot of names that could be potentially playing their last game as an Eagle this week. And you look at guys like Malik Jackson, you look at guys like Brandon Graham, you look at guys like maybe potentially Zach Ertz. Maybe you look at guys like Fletcher Cox. I don't know what his situation is going to be, too. They got to make a lot of difficult decisions in the offseason. And there's certainly going to be guys who are playing their last game as an Eagle, if they even play. Because I don't know if you saw the injury report today. That injury report was pretty huge, pretty substantial. And in the Eagles' best interest, it would be to hold out as many guys as possible. Because I know they want to knock Washington out, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You want to move up and try and get into that top 5.
All right, one more question before we let you go, Rob. We've talked a lot about the offense, the quarterback, the head coach, all that. Defensively, Jim Schwartz takes a lot of heat from the fan base, and I know his defense leads in a lot of – or is top in the league in some categories, but I feel as though the bad performances outweigh the really good performances by his defense. Does Jim Schwartz survive this offseason?
I think he does. But that's been one where you look at even a Super Bowl year. They won a Super Bowl. They gave up 500-plus yards. They didn't win the Super Bowl because of Jim Schwartz and his defense. But if Doug Peterson survives, so is Jim Schwartz, because what Doug likes to do is allow Jim Schwartz to be the head coach of the defense. Now, he can point to lack of talent there, right? He can point to, well, you guys don't really invest in linebackers for me. We've had a ton of injuries in the secondary. We spent a lot of money on the defensive line, and a lot of them go down or they're underperforming. That's not a Jim Schwartz problem. That's a talent acquisition issue. Again, so I think for that reason, Jim Schwartz will be allowed another opportunity to be the DC next year.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to come on and chat with us for a little bit about the Eagles. Great follow on Twitter, everyone. So go follow him on Twitter. Rob Maaddi, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, guys. Sorry about the darkness. I'm hiding out in my car. We were just at the aquarium with the kids. So
you're all good. Thank you.
Don't worry about it.
Appreciate it, fellas.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.